has justice finally been delivered? Hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters will be exonerated through new emergency laws. Speaking in the Commons today, Rishi Sunak promised that victims of the Horizon IT scandal will be acquitted and compensated quickly.
This is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. People who worked hard to serve their communities had their lives and their reputations destroyed through absolutely no fault of their own. The victims must get justice and compensation. Sir Win Williams' inquiry is undertaking crucial work to expose what went wrong, and we've paid almost £150 million in compensation to over 2,500 victims. But today I can announce that we will introduce new primary legislation to make sure that those convicted as a result of the Horizon scandal are swiftly exonerated and compensated. We will also introduce a new upfront payment of £75,000 for the vital GLO group of postmasters.
Well, ministers drew up the plans amid huge public pressure after the hit ITV drama Mr Bates versus the Post Office gripped the nation. The new law, which will work on a blanket basis, is to be introduced within weeks with a view to granting the acquittals later this year. Former sub-postmistress Seema Misra, who was wrongly sentenced to 15 months behind bars when she was 8 weeks pregnant, told TalkTV how close she came to taking her own life in prison.
It was the most difficult part of my life. My family, my eldest son, my husband, my family kept me going. But definitely, if I would have been pregnant, I would have killed myself because I felt like I brought a shame to my family for being to prison.
Well, meanwhile, the new Minister for Common Sense has made her first contribution in that role. Esther McVey backed a knighthood for sub-postmaster Alan Bates, who led the fight, of course, against the Post Office, saying she'd like to see him knighted as soon as possible. And in a surprise royal twist, one of the postmasters caught up in the scandal has revealed that Kate Middleton and her family supported him during his battle, inviting him to her wedding and attending a party when his conviction was quashed. Hamza Shingaria ran the village shop and post office in Upper Bucklebury, where the Middletons were loyal customers. The last story, that's very sweet. I'm sure a lot of people will be delighted. But of course, the main point is he was one of thousands who were accused and caught up with this. Hundreds of sub-postmasters who were convicted and had their lives completely overtaken and destroyed by this. And of course, there are three elements. And today is a big day. And I do congratulate the government for getting on with it. You know, in some ways, it's a shame that it had to happen, that it only happened when the public, was in absolute outrage about it. But obviously, we need exoneration for these miscarriages of justice. Then those who have been, victims of that need compensating. But we also need justice for them. We need to know what went wrong. We need to know who was culpable, who covered what up, and whether there are criminal charges to be faced. By both the people behind Horizon at Fujitsu, by those at the Post Office. So this has been 20 years in the making, and we've probably got another few years to come.
And I think that's a really good point about the time frame here. You said you congratulate the government for getting on with it. I'm concerned that it may take till the end of the year, they've indicated. Yep. Why? They were able to pass historic legislation shutting down the entire country in the space of 24, 48 hours. So why should it take up to a year to get this sorted out? These people have already suffered for far too long. And I think there has been a catastrophic political failure here. How many MPs were approached about this story by individual sub-postmasters, by individuals who were affected? I bet almost every single one of those who were falsely accused tried to get their MP fully engaged in it. Those MPs, individually and collectively, failed to champion the cause. And I'm also going to make a confession here. I think there's been a journalistic fail, and I'm going to put myself in that category. I was looking back at my records, and I'm afraid that I was first approached about this story in summer 2019 by one of the key campaigners, and they sent me a series of emails about it, and I just didn't really engage. And I can't be the only journalist that was contacted.
Can I ask you why you did?
So I've been thinking about this. Basically, as a journalist, I'm pretty thinly spread. A lot of people approached me with stories of varying degrees of interest. but there was something that failed to resonate with me. And I think what went wrong in terms of the campaigning to get public attention on this story is that it was too bitty. It didn't coalesce enough, and it wasn't pitched right. And that isn't an excuse for me that I failed to engage in the story. But I think that had it been a punchier, more professional campaign, this would have been resolved long ago. But really, that goes to the heart of the fact these people didn't have the resources.
Theme throughout the whole thing?
They didn't have the resources.
But the whole drama is so moving and so compelling. And as you said, people's lives were destroyed. But they were told time and time again, it's only you that has a problem with the system.
Yes.
And the resonance for me was the little person versus the machine.
Yes.
Being told the whole time. It doesn't add up, you know, ringing up saying, I need to have some help with this. And they're saying, no, actually, you have made the error. That is, I think, where the resonance lies. And people's lives were destroyed. 4 people killed themselves as a result of all of this. And we've forgotten all of that. And the fact is that it's taken this long. I agree with you. 2019, it goes back.
Way back.
So 20, years or thereabouts.
Why didn't enough people getting excited by it?
On that point, and I share exactly that point about responsibility. However, for Nick Wallace, who was the journalist who's presenting Primetime here on Talk at 7 this evening, I had Nick on the programme about 5 years ago.
You did, yeah.
And he came on and he talked about it. He flagged it up to me and said, look, there's this really interesting story I'm doing. He was crowdfunding his investigation into this so he could sit every day throughout. Well, they always say as a journalist, you know, don't sit through financial court cases because you'll lose the will to live after about hour 2 because they go on and on and on. And this, of course, has a huge financial and tech implications to it. But Nick did it, and he did it diligently. He flagged this up. I invited him on the show. He came on. He talked about it. We were all gobsmacked. And I said to him at the time, how is this not front page news every day?
Yeah.
And then he came back on a couple of times. I regret not having him on every week.
Yeah.
Now I think about it, because it's something, you're right, didn't quite coalesce, even though it was quite obvious it was a very serious story. But something, I don't know what it was. It wasn't about a moral neglect or we don't care about this. For some reason, although we interviewed him 3 or 4 times over that period, it didn't go any further than that. Yeah. And now, of course, it is. To go back to the point of today, Rishi Sunak and what he's announced, I mean, this is kind of first base territory. It might be the beginning of the end for some people. There's a lot of people, 700, who won't fall into this category. I interviewed a woman today who in 2003 began this process of realising the books were not tallying. She had to pay the money back. That was in the contract. She paid the money back and was told, you're not going to face any charges. So she didn't get prosecuted, but she's still 30,000 quid short because she had to give the money back. Yeah. Now, what happens to her? Because she wouldn't be seen as somebody who needs a conviction overturned. She hasn't got one.
See, Isabel, I think you're being too harsh on yourself, to be honest, because although perhaps you didn't go with the story, as Colin says, some people did go with the story. And unfortunately, for the public, for the wider public, we weren't interested in it. And as you say, maybe it wasn't a meaty enough story, it wasn't sexy enough, it wasn't enough intrigue about it, or it was too bitty. But unless the public have that push, and now we've seen with the with the drama, the push has come from that.
It's all in the telling. It's all in the telling. And the truth is, at any one time, I could probably name 6 or 7 other stories that are ongoing that people email me about periodically, and they just don't get me going quite enough to push for it to be a front page.
Isabel, I think you're absolutely right. I've been saying this the last few days. My experience in newsrooms was this was a really hard story to sell to an editor.
Page 2, basically.
And one of the reasons is because of its size. You couldn't quite comprehend that all these people, you know, we've all covered those stories where a class action is taken against Birmingham City Council about sex discrimination. It's quite a dry story. And I think a lot of people thought this was a similar type of story. Of course, it wasn't at all. It was very, very dissimilar. This was about hundreds of actual victims, not people who had just missed out on some, you know, on a pay fair deal. Very, very different. But to some people, it just felt like it was similar. There are so many other elements of this story that I've been really shocked by. I've been listening to Nick Wallace's 17-part podcast, and one of the things that is not in the drama is the racism that was going on at Fujitsu and at the post office. You know, as a result of FOI demands, they've discovered that the post office was racially categorising their sub-postmasters.
Wow.
And one of the categories they used, and apologies in advance, was negroid.
Gosh.
And that has come out in an FOI. Also at Fujitsu.
But they wrote that down.
They wrote that down. And I'm talking about around 2010, not 1950.
Yeah.
Just, you know, in really recent history, this has come out. And the other thing I was listening to him, Nick Wallace, talking about was that in some of the evidence that came out of Fujitsu, where they were all, basically, they were obsessing on finding people who'd stolen money.
Yeah.
And they constantly said, I found another Patel with his hand in the till.
Oh,
I found another Patel with his hand in his till. This, you know, there was blatant, it seems to me, racism there as well, which has got to come out. And the chief executive has said, Nick Wallace interviewed him again on the podcast, the current chief executive, I think he's called Nick Reed or something, did say he was, you know, absolutely horrified, speechless. It was, you know, so he didn't deny it.
Yeah.
But they haven't been held very accountable thus far by the government. So at the moment, all compensation is coming from the taxpayer. Now, Fujitsu continues to coin it in with multi-million-pound contracts, including for the same people that they've let down. This is a company, by the way, that tried to sue the NHS after one of its other contracts went wrong. So I'd like to see a lot more accountability from them.
I'm afraid it's corrupt through and through. Talking of Fujitsu, as I just was, and this is another choice story that came out, Gareth Jenkins, who is allegedly the tech expert who built the dodgy Horizon system, has apparently demanded immunity before he appears at the public inquiry, saying, he said that he wouldn't take part unless he was given immunity. And the other thing that's come out is in the latest post office accounts, they paid bonuses to executives for taking part in the inquiry.
Brilliant.
But this goes back to the bigger point. Who knew what and when? And when's the redress happening to
lots of people knew lots.
That's the point.
Throughout
so what did Fujitsu know? So in that drama, it makes very clear about the back door. They said there's no back door into the system. Then, of course, we found out there was a back door. Gareth Jenkins also gave evidence. That was then used to prosecute other people in there. So all of that needs to be uncovered.
And I tell you what else there is a revolving door. We need to look at the links between Fujitsu and the government. Some of that comes out in the WhatsApps from the lockdown files, and I'll be saying more about that in due course.
But it's extraordinary. Not a single person has lost their dogs.
Immunity. I mean, this fellow should be hounded out of his house with a cattle prod. Made to speak.
Exactly.
It's that serious.